Welcome to the Employment Law Channel. I'm Scott Drake. It's written in the New York Times the number of discrimination cases filed by city employees in New York has risen, even as Mayor Michael Bloomberg has adopted a far less adversarial role than his predecessor did in dealing with the city's gigantic workforce. My guest is Lewis Steel of counsel with Outten Golden in Manhattan. He is a class action employment discrimination specialist. Lewis, a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be with you.
Well, a quick previous conversation we had before this interview, I'm getting that you're not surprised by any of this.
Sure. Well, there are really two levels to the problem. In New York City's agencies, you have a commissioner, and among the people that report to the commissioner is a equal opportunity officer who should be the person to make sure that the agency personnel are not discriminating. Now, the problem there is that the EEO officer reports to the commissioner. And the commissioner's interest really is to hold down the number of complaints in his or her agency. So the EEO officer is far from being independent. He or she operates under the thumb of the commissioner and therefore often becomes ineffective. That's on one level. The second level really involves the Corporation Counsel's office that defends all of these cases once they go to court. And the problem there is that, in my experience, the Corporation Counsel defends them all without making any effort to determine what can be done to eliminate these complaints. What's going wrong? Why are there so many complaints? What mechanisms, what systematic changes would reduce those complaints? And the Corporation Counsel's office simply does not do that. All it does is defend. And what you saw in the New York Times article was a whole list of settlements, some of which were fairly substantial. So you've got this systematic problem which exists both within the agency because of the EEO officers not reporting to an independent authority, and then on top of that you have Corporation Counsel, which only takes defense as its role.
And then as Mayor Mr. Bloomberg has said that discrimination in any kind of level is not to be tolerated, and one would expect that probably the way that he handles his office would probably help that happen a little bit better, but what you're saying is that the whole system really just isn't going to work right no matter who's in charge. And I'm guessing too that because of budgetary cutbacks, there's less staff to even address it.
Well, that might be so, but let's take another level of the problem, and that's the class actions that have been filed against the city, and some of which have been settled at the cost of considerable millions of dollars against the city, and have led to settlement decrees which, if enforced, would go very far to eliminate the problem. And enforcement, again, generally involves the cooperation of the Corporation Counsel. If the Corporation Counsel would say, look, this is a major problem, we've settled it, and I'm thinking of the police department in the Latinos officers case, which is mentioned in the New York Times article, and my own class action against the New York City Parks Department, which was also settled at the cost of considerable millions of dollars to the city. In both of those cases, what Corporation Counsel should be saying, we are going to lean over backwards to make sure that these problems don't arise again. And instead, in my experience, what Corporation Counsel does is it does everything in its power to defend the prerogatives of the agency without saying to the agency, in the cases I've given you examples of, the Parks Department, the Police Department, that, look, do everything in your power to avoid these problems, and the city will be much better off. And they simply don't do that. There's another major class action case against the city involving women working on the bridges of the city. These types of cases really should be warning signals to both the city, to the Corporation Counsel, to the equal opportunity officers that something is structurally wrong, and that simply doesn't happen. It didn't happen under Mayor Giuliani, and it doesn't happen under the present mayor.
As somebody who's had a lot of experience on the other side of the litigation table there, and you've actually been through the process with your lawsuit with the Parks Department, would a first step be having, for example, the EEO officer reporting to an independent agency? Would that be a good first step? Are there any other things that you would do right off the bat that you could say, you know what, we could get this done right now and it would certainly help things?
Well, in the Corporation Counsel's office, I would have a section that was devoted to looking at the structure of the equal employment practices in the city and seeing how to improve it. And also, every time a complaint is filed, I would not only have that office determine how to best defend it, but how to see whether or not there are policies and practices in that agency that should be changed. I don't see that. I don't see that happening at all. And finally, for example, in the New York Times article, and I don't know the answer to this, but it's an important question. Assuming the city paid out $200,000, for example, in a sex discrimination case, a hostile work environment case, I would like to know what happened to the employee or employees involved in that hostile work environment. I would like to know what happened to the EEO officer in that agency that tolerated that conduct. And I would also call on the carpet the commissioner on that agency and determine what he or she is doing to make sure that such conduct doesn't occur again.
So what you're saying is a lot of times here, you know, they just rush to settlement and then nobody goes, well, what happened here, and tries to fix it.
And the problem absolutely remains, okay. And that's a shame.
My guest is Lewis Steel of Counsel with Outten Golden in Manhattan. Lewis, it's a great pleasure. We appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you very much.
And you're watching the Employment Law Channel.